The night I found out, everything came crashing down like a house of cards. I wasn't expecting betrayal. No one ever really does. The signs had been there, sure, late nights, secretive phone calls, the way Melanie seemed to drift further from me with each passing week. But it wasn't until I saw the message on her phone that the truth hit me like a freight train. It was a text from someone named Victor. Looking forward to seeing you tonight. I'll make it worth your while, beautiful. I stared at the screen, disbelief rooting me in place. My mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was work-related? A client from her marketing firm? But deep down, I knew better. No business partner signs off like that. I scrolled through the rest of the messages, each one a nail in the coffin of my marriage. Dinner dates at upscale restaurants I'd never heard of, hotel reservations, coded flirtations. Every word stabbed me in the gut. I didn't confront her immediately. No, that would have been too easy. She was in the shower, oblivious to the storm building on the other side of the bathroom door. I stood in the hallway, phone in hand, every part of me screaming to burst in and demand answers. But I didn't. Instead, I set the phone down, took a deep breath, and walked away. I needed a plan. Blind rage would get me nowhere. Over the next few days, I did my homework. Victor was no ordinary fling. He owned a casino, the Mirage Edge, one of the most exclusive high-roller spots in the city. His wealth was built on luck, manipulation, and the desperation of gamblers who always believed they could beat the house. But I knew something about gambling that Victor probably didn't expect from an average man like me. I was a damn good card player. Better than good. I'd spent years honing my skills at poker, blackjack, and other games where probability and psychology collided. And now, I had a use for those skills. The plan formed slowly, each piece falling into place like cards in a winning hand. First, I needed to infiltrate Victor's world without raising suspicion. I couldn't storm into his life as a scorned husband. No, I had to become someone he trusted, an ally. I would play the long game, lure him in, and then take everything from him. His money. His ego. And Melanie. The first step was gathering information. I spent my evenings at smaller casinos, testing myself, warming up after years away from the tables. It felt like slipping into a familiar rhythm. The sounds of chips clinking, the low murmur of players, the intense focus at each hand, it all came rushing back to me. But this wasn't just practice. I needed to learn about Victor's circle, who he trusted, and how to get close to him. Through casual conversations with dealers and other gamblers, I learned that Victor hosted private high-stakes games at his casino. These games weren't advertised or open to the public. You had to be invited, and the buy-in was astronomical. Perfect. If I could get in, I'd have him right where I wanted him. But there was one problem. I didn't have the kind of money it took to sit at Victor's table. Melanie and I had savings, sure, but not millions. I wasn't going to risk my financial future just yet. That's when I decided on a different strategy. I'd win my way there. Over the course of 2 weeks, I entered mid-level games, gradually increasing my earnings. I played smart, never drawing too much attention but consistently walking away with more than I came with. Word spread. People began to notice the quiet man who rarely lost. One night, after a particularly tense poker game where I took home nearly $100,000, a well-dressed man approached me at the bar. He introduced himself as Dennis, one of Victor's managers. "You've got a good game," Dennis said, sipping his whiskey. "We've been watching you. Ever think about stepping up to the big leagues?" I played it cool, giving a casual shrug. "Depends. What do you have in mind?" Dennis smiled. "Private event. High stakes. The kind of place where fortunes are made, or lost. I think you'd fit right in." Bingo. This was the opening I needed. "Sounds interesting," I replied. "I've been looking for a new challenge." Dennis handed me a business card with an address and a date. "Be there Friday night. And bring your A game. Victor doesn't like amateurs." Victor. He didn't know it yet, but he was about to meet someone who had every reason to see him lose. The days leading up to Friday were filled with preparation. I spent hours sharpening my strategies, studying my opponent's habits and tells. I knew that once I sat at Victor's table, there would be no room for error. This wasn't just about winning money. It was about psychological warfare. I needed to plant the seeds of doubt in both Victor and Melanie, make them question each other, make them paranoid. Divide and conquer. By the time Friday rolled around, I was ready. As I drove to the casino, I felt an eerie calm settle over me. The man who had been blindsided by his wife's betrayal was gone. In his place stood someone colder, more calculating. I wasn't just going to win this game, I was going to destroy Victor and take back control of my life. The stakes were set. It was time to deal the cards. Friday night arrived, and with it, the first real test of my plan. As I approached the mirage edge, the casino loomed in front of me like a glittering fortress of greed and temptation. The neon lights reflected off the polished marble entrance, casting long shadows over the sharply dressed patrons moving in and out. To the outside world, this was a place of excitement and opportunity. To me, it was the battleground where I would dismantle Victor piece by piece. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne, the clatter of poker chips, and the hum of conversations mingling with the occasional cheers of a winner. My pulse quickened, but I kept my face impassive. Tonight wasn't about nerves. It was about control, both of the cards and the people around me. Dennis, Victor's manager, was waiting near the entrance to the VIP lounge. He gave me a nod and a brief smile. "You made it. Good. Let's get you settled." I followed him past the velvet ropes that separated the regular gamblers from the elite few. The difference was stark. In the VIP area, everything was quieter, more refined. No garish slot machines, no loud crowds. Just private tables where the real power players sat, men and women with fortunes at their fingertips. "Victor will be here shortly," Dennis said, leading me to a table in the center of the room. "He likes to watch new players before joining in. Make an impression." I gave a slight nod. "Don't worry. I always do." The other players were already seated, 4 men and 1 woman, all dressed in tailored suits and designer dresses. They barely glanced at me as I took my seat, their attention focused on the dealer who began shuffling a deck of cards. I recognized a few faces from my research: hedge fund managers, tech entrepreneurs, a retired oil tycoon. These weren't amateurs, but neither were they professional card players. They relied on their wealth to intimidate, not their skill. That gave me an edge. The first few hands were uneventful. I played conservatively, folding when necessary and winning just enough to stay on the table's radar without drawing too much attention. I studied each player's habits. The way the woman fidgeted with her bracelet when she bluffed, the way one of the men held his breath slightly whenever he had a strong hand. Patterns emerged, and I stored them away for later. But my real focus was on the man who hadn't arrived yet. Victor. About an hour in, the atmosphere shifted. The chatter around the table quieted, and I knew without looking that he had arrived. Victor stepped into the room like he owned it, which, in a way, he did. Tall, broad-shouldered, and immaculately dressed, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never known failure. His sharp eyes scanned the room, landing on each player in turn before finally meeting mine. I didn't flinch. I held his gaze, giving him the faintest nod of acknowledgement. He smirked slightly and made his way to the table, taking a seat directly across from me. "So you're the new guy," he said, his voice smooth and deep. "Dennis told me you've been making waves. What's your name?" "Jack," I replied simply. "Jack." He leaned back in his chair, studying me with a curiosity that bordered on suspicion. "Well, Jack, welcome to my table. I hope you're ready for a real game." "Oh, I wouldn't be here if I wasn't," I said, keeping my tone measured. "The question is, are you ready for me?" The other players chuckled nervously, sensing the subtle tension between us. Victor's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "We'll see," he said. "Let's play." The next few hands were a delicate dance of strategy and deception. Victor was good, better than I'd expected. He read the table like a seasoned predator, knowing when to press his advantage and when to fold. But I wasn't here to lose. I countered his moves with calm precision, taking small but meaningful pots that chipped away at his control. As the night wore on, Victor began to take notice. His eyes narrowed slightly each time I won, though he masked his frustration well. He wasn't used to losing, not at his own game, in his own domain. That's exactly what I wanted. At one point, as the dealer prepared a new hand, Victor leaned forward slightly. "You've got skill," he said quietly. "Not many people can hold their own at this table. Where'd you learn to play?" I gave a nonchalant shrug. "Here and there. You pick up a lot if you know where to look." He tapped his fingers on the table, as if weighing my words. "Well, stick around. We might make a fortune tonight. Or lose one." By the end of the session, I had won enough to earn Victor's respect. He wasn't pleased, but he wasn't hostile either. In his world, respect was currency, and tonight I had gained some of it. He clapped me on the shoulder as we stood to leave. "Good game, Jack," he said. "We'll do this again soon." "Looking forward to it," I replied. As I walked out of the casino, I felt the weight of the night lift slightly from my shoulders. Phase 1 was complete. Victor saw me as a potential ally, or at least a worthy competitor. Now, the real game could begin. But this was just the start. I would have to keep winning, not just at the tables but in the battle of minds that was about to unfold. The stakes were high, and I couldn't afford a single misstep. The following week, I immersed myself deeper into Victor's world. The Mirage Edge wasn't just a casino, it was an empire built on excess, secrecy, and power. Victor thrived here, a king surrounded by loyal subjects and opportunists hoping to ride his coattails. But I wasn't here to grovel. I was here to tear down his kingdom brick by brick. Dennis kept in touch, inviting me to more games and events. Victor had taken a liking to me, though I could tell he still hadn't decided if I was friend or foe. That was perfect. The longer I kept him guessing, the better my chances of gaining his full trust. I didn't just play poker, I played people. In every conversation, I dropped subtle questions to learn more about Victor's habits, weaknesses, and his relationship with Melanie. I discovered that Melanie was a regular guest at the casino, though Victor was careful not to flaunt their connection in public. Still, the whispers were there, rumors of late-night rendezvous in the penthouse suite, of lavish gifts exchanged behind closed doors. One evening, as I prepared for another high-stakes game, I caught sight of Melanie for the first time since this whole nightmare began. She walked into the casino arm-in-arm with Victor, her laughter echoing softly through the room. She wore a red dress that clung to her like sin itself, her hair cascading over her shoulders in loose waves. My stomach churned, a mix of anger and heartbreak hitting me all at once. She hadn't noticed me yet. Good. I wasn't ready to confront her, not like this. I watched from a distance, taking in every detail. She looked happy. Carefree. As if the life we'd built together meant nothing. My jaw tightened as I turned away, forcing myself to focus. I couldn't afford to let emotions cloud my judgment. Not yet. The night's game took place in a private lounge, even more exclusive than the VIP area I'd seen before. The room was dimly lit, the atmosphere charged with quiet tension. Victor sat at the center of the table, flanked by his closest associates. His eyes sparkled with amusement as he shuffled a deck of cards. "Jack," he greeted me as I took my seat. "Glad you could make it. We're playing for real stakes tonight. Hope you're ready." "I wouldn't miss it," I replied, sliding my chips onto the table. The game began, and for the first few hands, I kept a low profile. I observed the other players, two of Victor's business partners and a slick-looking man named Marcus, who apparently ran an offshore investment firm. These men were sharks, used to bluffing and bullying their way to victory. But they underestimated me. They always did at first. Victor, however, didn't. He watched me closely, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. He knew I was a wild card, and that made him nervous. Good. Halfway through the game, Victor leaned in. So, Jack, tell me something. What do you do outside of this? I met his gaze steadily. A little bit of everything. But these days, I'm looking for new opportunities. Opportunities? He raised an eyebrow. What kind? Business, investment, connections. You know how it is. Victor chuckled softly. Yeah, I do. You strike me as someone who knows how to read a room, and a game. That's a valuable skill. I smiled. It served me well. We continued playing, the stakes climbing with each hand. I let Victor win a few rounds, feeding his ego, but I made sure to land enough blows to keep him on edge. The dance between us became more intense, each move calculated to test the other's resolve. By the end of the night, I had doubled my earnings, but the real victory was psychological. Victor saw me as a potential partner, someone who could be useful to him. That was exactly what I wanted. As the players dispersed, Victor motioned for me to stay behind. He poured 2 glasses of bourbon and handed one to me. You're good, Jack. Real good. I've seen guys like you before, but there's something different about you. You've got a sharp mind, and you don't scare easy. I've had my share of tough situations, I replied, taking a sip of the bourbon. It burned going down, but I didn't flinch. You learned to keep your cool. Victor nodded approvingly. I like that. We could use someone like you around here. There it was, an invitation into his inner circle. The temptation to gloat was strong, but I kept my expression neutral. I appreciate that. I'm always open to new opportunities. He smiled, but there was a glint of calculation in his eyes. Opportunities, huh? Well, let's see where this goes. We clinked glasses, sealing an unspoken agreement. Victor thought he was reeling me in. What he didn't realize was that I was baiting him, pulling him further into my trap with every passing day. As I left the casino that night, I spotted Melanie again. She stood near the entrance, speaking softly with Marcus. Her expression was tense, her eyes darting nervously around the room. I wondered what secrets she was hiding. Did she suspect I knew? Did she even care? I walked past her without a word. Soon enough, she'd find out just how much I knew, and how far I was willing to go to destroy the life she had chosen over ours. This wasn't just a game anymore. It was war. The tension was tightening like a noose around all of us, Victor, Melanie, and me. Each day I spent at the Mirage Edge, the stakes grew higher, both at the tables and in the mind games we were all playing. Victor, still unaware of who I truly was, continued to pull me into his world, grooming me as a potential ally. But it wasn't just business for him anymore. I could tell by the way he subtly tested me, as though trying to figure out my weaknesses. Melanie's presence became harder to ignore. She appeared more frequently at the casino, sometimes with Victor, sometimes with others. I watched from the shadows as she smiled and laughed with him, but there were moments when cracks in her facade began to show. There were times when her gaze lingered too long on me, a flash of recognition and unease in her eyes. Maybe she sensed I was playing my own game. Good. Let the paranoia set in. At the next private game, the atmosphere was different, charged with an undercurrent of tension I couldn't quite place. The buy-in was steep, more than I had ever risked before. But I had prepared for this. Over the past few weeks, I'd built my bankroll through carefully calculated wins. Victor and his circle believed I was just another gambler on a hot streak. They had no idea that every move I made was designed to get me to this point. The players tonight were some of the most influential men in Victor's orbit: casino executives, real estate moguls, and an international banker named Andre who barely spoke but watched everything with hawk-like precision. Victor sat at the center, his presence dominating the table. The first few rounds were methodical. I played cautiously, letting the others build a rhythm. Victor was in his element, bluffing his way into early wins, his smirk widening with each victory. But I wasn't here to lose. As the game progressed, I began to shift gears. I baited them with calculated risks, letting them think I was becoming overconfident. Then I struck. On one pivotal hand, Victor bet aggressively, pushing a large stack of chips into the center of the table. The others folded quickly, unwilling to challenge him. All eyes turned to me as I considered my cards. 2 kings, one of the strongest starting hands in poker. I studied Victor carefully. He leaned back in his chair, a show of casual arrogance. But there was something in the way his fingers tapped lightly on the table, a tell he likely didn't even realize he had. He was bluffing. "I'll see a raise," I said, pushing my chips forward. "And raise you another 50,000. A hush fell over the table. Victor's eyes narrowed, his playful demeanor slipping for just a moment. He was calculating, assessing whether I had him beat. After a tense pause, he chuckled and shook his head. "You've got guts, Jack. I'll give you that." He called the bet, and the dealer revealed the final card on the table, a king of spades. I now had a 3 of a kind. Victor's expression hardened as he realized his bluff had failed. I met his gaze and held it, daring him to make a move. "Show 'em," I said calmly. Victor revealed his hand, 2 queens. Strong, but not strong enough. I turned over my cards, and the table erupted in murmurs. The pot was mine. Victor smiled tightly. "Impressive. Looks like I underestimated you." "Don't worry," I said, stacking my winnings. "It happens to everyone eventually." After the game, Victor pulled me aside. He led me to a private balcony overlooking the glittering city skyline. The air was crisp, a welcome contrast to the stifling atmosphere inside. He handed me a cigar, which I accepted but didn't light. "You're full of surprises, Jack," he said, leaning on the railing. "Most guys who come through here think they can take me, but they all end up broke. You're different." "I've had to be," I replied. "Life doesn't give you many second chances." Victor nodded thoughtfully. "You know, I could use someone like you in my operations. Someone who understands risk and reward. You've got a good head on your shoulders." This was the moment I had been waiting for, a chance to get even closer to him. But I couldn't show too much eagerness. "I appreciate the offer," I said carefully. "But I'm not sure what you're looking for." "I'm looking for loyalty," he said bluntly. "This business isn't just about money. It's about trust. And I don't trust many people. But I'm starting to trust you." I forced a smile. "Trust is earned. Let's see where this goes." Victor clapped me on the back. "Smart man. We'll talk more soon." As he walked away, I exhaled slowly. I was in deeper than ever, but that was exactly where I needed to be. Victor thought he was gaining an ally. What he didn't know was that I was systematically dismantling his empire from within. Later that night, I spotted Melanie again. She stood near the bar, sipping champagne and laughing with Marcus, the offshore investment guy. Her laughter was forced, her eyes darting nervously around the room. I approached quietly, catching her off guard. "Jack," she said, her voice strained. "What are you doing here?" "Just enjoying the view," I replied casually. "Nice to see you again, Melanie." She glanced around as if worried someone might see us. "You shouldn't be here." "Why not?" "You seem right at home." I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. "How's Victor treating you these days?" Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't," I said with a smirk. "But don't worry. We'll talk again soon." I walked away, leaving her standing there, shaken. The seeds of doubt were planted. Soon, she would start questioning everything, Victor, me, and most importantly, herself. The pieces were falling into place. This wasn't just a game anymore. It was a reckoning. Melanie's reaction lingered in my mind. The fear in her eyes wasn't just guilt. It was the fear of someone caught between 2 powerful forces, and knowing deep down that she was losing control. That fear would be my greatest weapon. I wasn't just playing against Victor anymore. Melanie was now an integral part of the game, and her growing paranoia would help me unravel everything they'd built together. The next few days passed in a calculated blur. I attended more high-stakes games, continued winning steadily, and made sure to build on Victor's trust. Each time I walked away with more of his money, I played it off like luck. Meanwhile, Melanie's behavior grew more erratic. She avoided eye contact when we crossed paths and whispered nervously to Victor in moments she thought no one noticed. But I noticed everything. At one particular game, the tension in the room was palpable. Victor was losing badly. His usual confidence had been replaced by a thin veneer of composure. Every time he lost another hand, I saw a flicker of frustration in his eyes. He hated losing control, and tonight the cards were not in his favor. The other players sensed it too. Marcus leaned over to me at one point and whispered, "He's in a bad mood tonight. Watch yourself." I gave a subtle nod. I didn't need the warning. I was already several moves ahead of Victor. By the time the final hand rolled around, the pot was massive. Victor had gone all in, trying to regain control of the table. He stared at me with a challenge in his eyes. "What's it going to be, Jack? You got the guts to match me?" I pretended to hesitate, playing the role of a man on the edge of a risky decision. In reality, I had a strong hand, four of a kind. There was no way Victor could beat me unless he had a straight flush, and judging by the tension in his posture, he didn't. "I'll call," I said, sliding my chips into the pot. Victor's jaw tightened. He revealed his cards, a full house. Strong, but not enough. I flipped my cards over slowly, savoring the moment. The room erupted in murmurs as I claimed the pot. Victor's expression darkened, but he forced a tight smile. "Well played," he muttered through gritted teeth. "Sometimes you have to take a leap," I replied, stacking my chips. "You win some, you lose some." Victor didn't respond. He downed the rest of his bourbon in one gulp and stood abruptly. "Game's over for tonight," he announced, his tone leaving no room for argument. The other players exchanged uneasy glances before quietly gathering their belongings. I could feel the tension simmering beneath Victor's calm exterior. He was unraveling, and I was pushing him closer to the edge. Later that night, I ran into Melanie again, this time in one of the casino's secluded lounges. She was sitting alone, a glass of wine clutched in her hand. Her eyes were distant, lost in thought. I approached slowly, giving her just enough time to notice me before I spoke. "Tough night?" I asked, taking a seat across from her. She flinched slightly but quickly composed herself. "What do you want, Jack?" "Just a conversation. We've barely talked since, well, you know." She sighed, rubbing her temples. "Look, I don't know what you think you're doing, but you need to leave. Victor doesn't like people getting too close to me." "Oh, I'm aware," I said, leaning forward. "But I'm not scared of Victor." "Maybe you should be, though." Her eyes snapped to mine, a flash of anger crossing her face. "What's that supposed to mean?" I shrugged. "Just an observation. Men like Victor, powerful, possessive, they don't exactly handle betrayal well. You think he'd protect you if things went south? You don't know anything about our relationship," she hissed. "Don't I?" I let the words hang in the air, watching as doubt flickered across her features. "You've been playing a dangerous game, Melanie. And I'm not the only one who's noticed." She fell silent, her grip tightening on the wine glass. I could see the wheels turning in her mind. Every seed of paranoia I planted was taking root. "Whatever you're trying to do," she finally said, her voice trembling, "it won't work." "We'll see," I replied, standing up. "You should be careful. Sometimes the people you trust the most are the ones who'll stab you in the back." I left her there, knowing the damage had been done. Melanie was spiraling, caught between her loyalty to Victor and the cracks in their relationship. It was only a matter of time before she broke completely. The next morning, I received a message from Victor. "Meet me tonight. We need to talk." I wasn't sure if it was a friendly meeting or a warning, but either way, I was ready. The game was accelerating, and I couldn't afford to slow down now. Everything was coming to a head, the tension, the lies, the mind games. Victor was starting to feel the pressure, and Melanie was unraveling right in front of him. When I arrived at the casino that evening, Dennis greeted me with a curt nod. "Victor's waiting upstairs," he said. I followed him to a private suite overlooking the casino floor. Victor stood by the window, staring down at the crowds below. He didn't turn around as I entered. "Jack," he said quietly. "We've got a problem." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh? What kind of problem?" He finally turned to face me, his expression unreadable. "People are talking. About you. About me. I need to know where your loyalties lie." The air grew thick with tension. This was a pivotal moment, one wrong move, and everything could come crashing down. But I wasn't going to flinch. I met his gaze and smiled faintly. "My loyalties?" I echoed. "They're right where they need to be." Victor's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't press further. Instead, he nodded slowly. "Good. Let's keep it that way." The lines were drawn. The stakes were rising. And I was ready for the next move. Victor's suspicions were growing, but he still didn't know the full extent of what I was doing. He wasn't the type to show weakness openly, but I could tell from the way he watched me now, his eyes narrow and calculating, that he was beginning to feel cornered. He had called me into his suite not just to test me, but to remind me who he thought held the power. "You've been doing well at the tables," he said, pacing slowly. "Maybe a little too well. Is that a problem?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. Victor smiled thinly. "Not yet. But I've seen guys like you before. You ride a lucky streak until it runs out. And when it does, you'll find out just how unforgiving this world can be." "Maybe," I replied with a shrug. "But luck's only part of the game. The rest is skill. You of all people should know that." Victor chuckled, though the sound was devoid of humor. He walked over to the bar and poured himself a drink. "Skill only takes you so far. In this business, you need alliances. People you can trust." He handed me a glass of bourbon and raised his own in a mock toast. I clinked my glass against his but didn't drink. "Trust is hard to come by," I said. "Especially around here." "You're right," he agreed, his eyes darkening. "Which is why I need to know something, Jack. Are you here to play, or are you here for something else?" This was the moment I had been anticipating. Victor was probing for weaknesses, trying to see if I would flinch under pressure. But I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. I smiled slightly and leaned against the bar. "I'm here to win," I said simply. "Same as you." Victor stared at me for a long moment before finally nodding. "Good. Let's keep it that way." As I left the suite, I knew I had bought myself more time, but the stakes were climbing faster than I had expected. Victor was on edge, and Melanie was unraveling. I needed to push them both just a little further. That night, I texted Dennis, arranging a private game with select players, including Marcus and another of Victor's business associates. The goal was simple: plant more doubt in Victor's mind while keeping Melanie off balance. The cracks in their relationship were widening, and I intended to drive a wedge right through the middle. At the game, I played aggressively, pushing hard on every hand. Marcus noticed and gave me a curious look. "You're taking a lot of risks tonight, Jack," he said. "Sometimes risks pay off," I replied, throwing in a massive bet that forced the other players to fold. Victor arrived halfway through the session, his presence instantly shifting the atmosphere. He didn't take a seat at the table but stood behind Marcus, observing quietly. His eyes flicked between me and the cards, watching my every move. I kept my composure, knowing that this was part of his test. He wanted to see how far I was willing to go. After the game, Victor pulled me aside again. This time, his tone was sharper. "You're pushing too hard," he said. "You're going to make enemies if you keep this up." "I can handle myself," I replied confidently. "Maybe," he said, stepping closer. "But just remember, this place has its own rules. People don't forget when you take what's theirs." It was a thinly veiled warning, but I played it off with a smirk. "Thanks for the advice." Victor didn't press the issue further, but I could see the gears turning in his mind. He was trying to figure me out, to stay one step ahead. But that was the beauty of the game I was playing. Every move he made was part of my plan. Later that night, I found Melanie in the lounge again. She was pacing anxiously, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. When she saw me, she froze. "We need to talk," I said, stepping closer. "I have nothing to say to you," she hissed. "Oh, I think you do," I replied. "You've been looking over your shoulder all week. How's that working out for you?" She glared at me, but there was fear behind her eyes. "What do you want, Jack? Revenge? Is that it? Revenge?" I chuckled softly. "No. This is about something bigger than that. I'm giving you a choice, Melanie. You can keep playing Victor's game, or you can walk away before it's too late." "Walk away?" she repeated bitterly. "You have no idea what you're talking about. Victor isn't someone you can just walk away from." "Maybe not," I conceded. "But you know as well as I do that he's not someone you can trust either." Her expression faltered, and I knew I had hit a nerve. She was trapped, just as much as Victor was. They both thought they could manipulate everyone around them, but now the walls were closing in. "Think about it," I said quietly. "Before it all comes crashing down." I left her standing there, her mind racing with doubt. The seeds were planted, and soon, she would have no choice but to confront the truth. The next morning, Victor sent me another message. "Meet me at the penthouse. We need to settle something." I knew the endgame was approaching. Victor was starting to feel the full weight of the pressure I had created. His empire was cracking, and Melanie was beginning to question everything she thought she knew. All that was left was the final hand, a showdown that would determine who walked away with everything. And I wasn't planning to lose. The elevator ride to Victor's penthouse was eerily quiet. I watched the numbers light up one by one, the soft hum of the machinery doing nothing to calm the tension in my chest. This meeting wasn't just a casual conversation, it was a reckoning. Victor had reached his breaking point, and I was about to push him over the edge. The doors slid open, revealing a lavish suite bathed in golden light. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city below. Victor stood near the bar, pouring himself a drink. He didn't greet me immediately, his back turned as if lost in thought. It wasn't until I stepped fully into the room that he spoke. "Jack," he said, his voice cold. "Do you know what I hate more than losing?" I crossed the room, keeping my posture relaxed. "What's that?" "Being played." He turned to face me, his eyes hard as steel. "And that's exactly what I feel like right now." I met his gaze without flinching. "You think I'm playing you?" "I don't think," he snapped. "I know. The question is, why? What's your angle?" I took a deep breath, letting the silence stretch for a moment. Victor was like a wounded animal now, cornered and dangerous. He wasn't looking for answers as much as he was looking for control, a way to reassert his dominance. But I had no intention of giving it to him. "You've built this world on lies, Victor," I said slowly. "People around you are either scared of you or using you. I'm not interested in playing by those rules." Victor narrowed his eyes. "Don't preach to me about rules. You've been winning big, making enemies, and stirring up trouble. That's not a coincidence." "No," I admitted. "It's not." The tension in the room thickened. For a moment I thought Victor might snap, but instead he laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. Most people wouldn't have the balls to admit it." "Most people aren't me," I said evenly. Victor paced back and forth, his mind clearly racing. He wasn't used to losing control like this. Every victory I'd taken from him, every moment of doubt I'd planted in his mind, it was all coming to a head. But there was still one piece left to move: Melanie. Almost on cue, the doors to the suite opened, and Melanie entered. She froze when she saw me, her eyes widening in shock. "What's going on?" she asked, glancing between us. "Good question," Victor said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Care to explain, Jack?" I turned to Melanie, letting her feel the full weight of my gaze. "I think it's time for the truth, don't you?" Her face paled. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Cut the act," Victor growled, stepping toward her. You've been acting weird for weeks. You think I haven't noticed? Victor. Don't Victor me, he snapped. What's going on between you two? Is this some kind of setup? Melanie's composure crumbled. She looked at me with a mixture of fear and desperation. Jack, please. You really thought you could play both sides, didn't you? I said softly, cutting her off. You thought you could use me while keeping Victor in the dark. But now the game's over. The room erupted into chaos. Victor cursed under his breath, pacing furiously. Melanie tried to defend herself, stammering excuses that only made things worse. I watched silently as the two of them unraveled before my eyes. This was exactly what I had been waiting for. When the shouting subsided, Victor rounded on me. You're loving this, aren't you? You've been pulling strings from the start. Not for the reason you think, I replied calmly. This wasn't about you, Victor. It was about Melanie. You were just collateral damage. Bullshit, he spat. You wanted to ruin me. I shrugged. You ruined yourself. I just gave you a little push. Victor's jaw clenched, but he didn't argue. He knew I was right. His empire was crumbling from within, and there was no one to blame but himself. Melanie, meanwhile, looked shattered, her carefully constructed world collapsing around her. You played both of us, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. No, I corrected. You played yourself? You made your choices, Melanie. You knew exactly what you were getting into. She shook her head, unable to respond. The weight of her betrayal was finally sinking in, and there was no escape from it. Victor drained the rest of his drink, and set the glass down with a loud clink. Get the hell out, he muttered, his voice low and dangerous. Both of you. Melanie hesitated, but I didn't. I turned and walked toward the door, pausing only briefly to glance back at her. This is what happens when you gamble with the wrong people, I said quietly. You lose. Without another word, I left the suite, the weight of victory settling over me. I had done what I came here to do. Victor was broken, his trust shattered. Melanie was humiliated, left to pick up the pieces of a life she had destroyed with her own hands. The game was over, but I had won. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I felt an eerie calm wash over me. The lights of the casino shimmered like distant stars, cold and indifferent. I had walked into this world to seek revenge, but now that I had it, I realized something else. This wasn't just about Melanie or Victor. It was about reclaiming control over my life, my future, and my sense of self. For the first time in months, I felt free. The next phase of my life could begin. But first, I was going to enjoy watching the aftermath unfold. A week passed, and the fallout from that night began spreading through the Mirage Edge like wildfire. The whispers circulated among Victor's staff and inner circle, stories of betrayal, broken alliances, and a crumbling empire. It didn't take long for word to reach the other casino owners and high rollers in the city. Victor's reputation was taking hit after hit, and he was struggling to maintain control. Melanie had all but disappeared from the scene. The few times I heard her name mentioned, it was always with a hint of scandal. Rumors flew that Victor had cut her off, that she was no longer welcome in his world. Some said she had tried to reach out to him, begging for forgiveness, but Victor wasn't in a forgiving mood. I had severed them from each other, and now they were both drowning in their own mistrust. I returned to the casino one last time, knowing I wouldn't need to set foot there again after tonight. My goal was complete, but there was still one final thread to tie up. Dennis met me at the entrance, his usual smug demeanor noticeably subdued. Victor's not in a good place right now, Dennis warned as we walked through the quiet corridors. Whatever happened between you two, let's just say it's making a lot of people nervous. Good, I replied without missing a beat. He needed to be taken down a notch. Dennis chuckled nervously. You don't seem too worried about the consequences. I'm not. I gave him a sharp look. Victor gambled, and he lost. That's the nature of the business, isn't it? Dennis didn't argue. He knew as well as I did that this was how power worked in places like this. You stayed on top by outplaying your rivals. Victor had failed to see the danger I posed until it was too late. When I entered the VIP lounge, I found Victor sitting alone at the same table where we had played our high-stakes games. He looked like a shadow of his former self. His suit was wrinkled, his tie loosened, and there was a weariness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. You showed up, he muttered, not bothering to stand. I thought we should have one last chat, I said, taking a seat across from him. You know, to clear the air. Victor snorted bitterly. Clear the air? After everything you've done? I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table. You did this to yourself, Victor. You trusted the wrong people. You let your ego blind you. Melanie? He asked with a sneer. She was just a distraction. I should have seen it coming. She wasn't just a distraction, I corrected. She was a reflection of your arrogance. You thought you could control her, just like you thought you could control everyone else. But that's not how this works. Victor's jaw tightened. He looked away, staring into the distance as if trying to piece together where it had all gone wrong. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I don't expect you to forgive me, I said after a moment. But maybe now you'll understand how it feels to be on the losing side. Victor chuckled darkly. You think you've won? You think this is over? It is, I said with finality. For you anyway. I'm done here. He didn't respond, and I stood, pushing my chair back with a slow scrape. I could feel his eyes on me as I walked away, but I didn't look back. Victor was finished, and he knew it. His empire was crumbling from within, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. On my way out, I spotted Melanie near the entrance. She was talking to Marcus, though it was clear from her body language that the conversation wasn't going well. Her face was pale, her eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. When she noticed me, her expression hardened. Jack, she said, her voice tight. Come to gloat? No, I replied. Just tying up loose ends. She crossed her arms, her gaze filled with a mixture of anger and desperation. You've ruined everything. I didn't ruin anything, I said calmly. You made your choices. I just made sure you faced the consequences. Her lips trembled slightly, but she quickly masked it with defiance. You think you're better than me? You think this makes you the hero? I'm not a hero, I said softly. I never claimed to be. But I'm also not the one who betrayed someone who loved me. That hit her harder than she wanted to admit. She turned away, blinking rapidly. For a moment neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us, heavy with everything that had been left unsaid. Goodbye, Melanie, I finally said. She didn't respond, and I walked away without looking back. Our story was over. Whatever life she had chosen with Victor was gone now, and she would have to live with that. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I felt a strange sense of peace. The lights of the city stretched out before me, glittering like 1,000 possibilities. I had come here seeking revenge, and I had gotten it. But more importantly, I had reclaimed control of my life. The house of cards had fallen, and I was still standing. This was the freedom I had fought for. No more lies, no more manipulation. Just a clean slate and the knowledge that I had won the only game that mattered. Tomorrow, I would start fresh. But tonight, I would savor the victory. The days following my final encounter with Victor and Melanie were strangely quiet. I had expected more fallout, perhaps threats, desperate attempts to reclaim power, or even retaliation. But there was nothing. The silence was almost anticlimactic, though it confirmed what I already knew. I had won. Victor had retreated into the shadows, his reputation in tatters. He couldn't risk open confrontation without drawing more attention to his losses. Melanie, too, had faded from the scene. From what I gathered, she was struggling to pick up the pieces of her life, now cut off from the wealth and security she had clung to for so long. For the first time in months, I felt like I could finally breathe. One evening, I sat at a small, quiet bar far from the glitz and noise of the casino district. The bartender poured me a neat glass of scotch, and I swirled it slowly, watching the amber liquid catch the light. I had been replaying the events of the past few weeks in my mind, trying to make sense of everything that had led me to this point. There was no denying it, I had become a different man through this ordeal. The betrayal, the games, the mind battles with Victor and Melanie, they had changed me. The naive trust one once had in people was gone, replaced by something colder, sharper. But I wasn't bitter. If anything, I felt stronger. I didn't regret what I had done. They had made their choices, and I had simply given them what they deserved. As I sat there reflecting, a familiar voice interrupted my thoughts. "Mind if I join you?" I turned to see Marcus, the offshore investor who had been a regular at Victor's games. He was dressed more casually tonight, his usual air of superiority replaced by a relaxed demeanor. I gestured to the empty stool beside me. "Didn't expect to see you here," I said as he took a seat. Marcus chuckled. "I like to keep tabs on interesting people. And you, Jack, have been very interesting lately. Is that so?" I raised an eyebrow, sipping my scotch. "Word gets around," he said, signaling for a drink. "Victor's not exactly subtle when things don't go his way. People are curious about you, how you manage to come out on top when most people crash and burn in his world." "I guess I just got lucky," I said with a smirk. "Sure." Marcus leaned in slightly. "But I don't think luck explains all of it. You were playing a deeper game than the rest of us, weren't you?" I didn't respond immediately. There was no point denying it, but I wasn't about to reveal everything either. "Let's just say I knew what I wanted and didn't stop until I got it." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Fair enough. You've got talent, Jack. You could do a lot more than just poker. If you ever want to expand your horizons, let me know." I gave a non-committal shrug. "I'll think about it." He seemed satisfied with that answer and raised his glass in a casual toast. "To winning." "To surviving," I corrected, clinking my glass against his. After Marcus left, I found myself alone again, but this time, I didn't mind. The city outside the window seemed brighter somehow, as if the weight of the past few months had finally lifted. I had played the game to its conclusion, and now there was nothing holding me back. I paid my tab and stepped out into the cool night air. The streets were alive with the hum of life, couples walking arm in arm, street performers entertaining small crowds, cars honking in the distance. It was a reminder that the world kept moving forward, no matter how much chaos one person's life might endure. I walked without a destination in mind, letting my thoughts wander. I thought about Melanie, about the love we had once shared and the bitter way it had ended. There had been a time when I would have done anything to save our marriage, but that time was long gone. She had chosen her path, and I had chosen mine. Now, there was only the future. The next morning, I packed up the last of my belongings from the house I had shared with Melanie. The place felt empty, stripped of the memories that had once defined it. I didn't feel sadness as I locked the door for the final time. Just a quiet sense of closure. I had already made arrangements to move to a new city, far from the ghosts of this chapter of my life. It was time to start over, to rebuild on my own terms. No lies. No manipulation. Just freedom. As I drove away, I allowed myself one last glance in the rearview mirror. The house grew smaller and smaller until it finally disappeared from sight. I didn't look back again. A few weeks later, I found myself sitting at a new poker table in a different city. The faces were unfamiliar, the stakes high. But this time, I wasn't here for revenge or mind games. I was here because I loved the game itself, the thrill of strategy, the delicate balance of risk and reward. As the dealer shuffled the cards, I felt a surge of calm confidence. I knew who I was now. I wasn't a man defined by betrayal or loss. I was a man who had survived, who had taken control of his destiny and come out stronger. The dealer handed me my cards, and I glanced at them briefly before placing my bet. The game had changed, but the rules were still the same. And this time, I was playing solely for myself.